Hello everyone. Today we will try and understand what happened on the 8th of November 2024. We will understand how to weigh two different perspectives that were presented in the media while taking help from the sage whom we have been following like a child for the past few videos. None other than Samuel Johnson. Basically, he will provide us with some guidance about what the mainstream media do during war times. But he will not go directly to the media. He will first lay down the philosophical justifications for why he thinks what he thinks, and then judge the role of media in times through which we are going right now. So what happened on the 8th of November? There was a match between Ajax and Maccabi Tel Aviv, during which the away fans booed during the silence in solidarity with the victims of Spanish floods. Once the match was finished, there were widespread riots throughout the city of Amsterdam, where the match was taking place. But what is interesting is how two narratives were constructed after the events of a tense night. One side, including most of the Western media, presented a narrative in which the Israeli fans were the victims. On the other hand, there were renowned journalists like Owen Jones and those belonging to the Middle East mostly, who presented the other narrative with evidence that it was actually the local Dutch citizens who were being targeted. Here we are not going to say who is on the right side and who is on the wrong side. We will just try to weigh the right and wrong presented to us according to the standards presented by Johnson in his essay. In fact, I must add, none of this weighing will be done in this video. I will just flesh out how Johnson understood the role of the media in these terrible times. Before we open the book to read Johnson, a word is in order to understand what we actually understand by the media. Johnson does not even mention the word media in his essay. But we all know that he is talking about them. He talks about news, and that is the part of the media. So the times have changed radically from the 18th century to the present moment, so have the technology and means employed by the media. But wait a second, we do not have the definition of media yet. So we first need to get that in our minds. Media is plural for medium. Medium comes from the Latin word medi, which literally means middle. Media are, in simplest terms, the middle term or the means with which we get to know about the world. They are the means of information to which we go when our mind itches to know what has happened in the world. So, for example, if we want to know what happened on the 8th of November, we have a variety of options in the form of media outlets that we can access, like the website of BBC News or the CNN or the YouTube channel of these outlets. I missed an example that is even more relevant to the controversy surrounding the reporting of the events in Ajax, i.e. Sky News. If you have not yet acquainted yourself with this information, just now you might be feeling the itch to type on your YouTube search bar Owen Jones or Sky News to satisfy, as Socrates would have said, the itch of desire which goes away as soon as it is rubbed. But that is the thing. The media are nothing but a transporter of information. We know nothing, and then enter media, and then we know something. But this information is neither truth nor wisdom, and in fact, nor knowledge. It is just a report, an opinion that has been presented or written by a journalist as he or she wants it to be popularized. In other words, every news is always an opinion. The verification of these opinions is assumed to be the task of the media, and if they do that or not, you are yourself a better judge. The onus also lies on our minds to verify these flashy journalists who shout a lot, say something good, something bad, maybe even follow some agenda. So it is on us to figure out what is truth. We are always surrounded by the media. Even a poster on the street giving us some stupid information about how tasty a burger is also a part of a media. It consumes our time and money, in fact, most of our time and money. All the media outlets in the world or independent journalists tap into our desire to know. And the interesting thing to note in the essay would be the beginning, because Johnson also begins the essay with the discussion of desire. This is essay number 30 in The Idler, published on 11th November 1758. Enough of my words, enough of this introduction. Let's see how the sage begins. Quote open. The desires of man increase with his acquisitions. Every step which he advances brings something within his view which he did not see before, and which, as soon as he sees it, he begins to want. Where necessity ends, curiosity begins. And no sooner are we supplied with everything that nature can demand than we sit down to contrive artificial appetites. Quote close. In these few lines, Johnson has summed up a few principles that would come to dominate the centuries to follow. We have already talked in detail about the nature of desire in the video we did on Ertugrul. In it, we have seen already how the nature of desire manifests itself. There are two elements of this nature, but there is a difference here. In that video, we looked at how we should earn money. Here, we are looking at how we should spend money. Furthermore, there is the addition of the element of time. How do we choose to consume our time? Firstly, there is a false premise embedded in every desire, an illusion planted in our minds and hearts that once our immediate desire, let's say of drinking coffee, gets satisfied, then there would be no more of it. And there is, in short term, no more of it. But in the long term, we have become prey to the trap set by the material world, because the second element is more powerful and works in tandem with the first element. Every desire carries with it pleasure of satisfaction. Though our desire is appeased and pleasure subsides after its appeasement, but as Plato has explained, pleasure begets pleasure. The desire to smoke is one of the prime examples of how desire reaches the stage of addiction. In my personal experience, mostly people who start smoking have some external motivation. Seeing others smoke convinces us to smoke, and usually it is not too good an experience the first time round. But with continual casual smoking, our desire to smoke becomes an addiction. What starts as a one off desire takes on a completely different meaning because we learn to find pleasure in it. And then slowly, even pleasure wanes off and it becomes a necessity. But Johnson does not stop there. He has more to offer. What happens after necessity? He is more interested in that. After necessity comes curiosity, trying different kinds of desires, satisfying whatever desire emerges in the heart as soon as possible. Getting restless to break the boredom and normality, because what we miss is that pleasure we had the first time we got the desire satisfied. Abundance of materiality is the depth of materiality, and that is what ultimately happens. Natural desires only have limited capacity to enlarge themselves. The mind becomes restless. As the common saying goes, we need to up our game and enjoy life to the fullest, so we must create new appetites. And that is precisely what we do. We create new fancy appetites. Though a sweater from the flea market would do the job, but our desire for augmenting our social appetites makes us spend hundreds of dollars at a fancy clothing store for a thing that could easily have been bought for much cheaper. Don't believe me? Here is what the master of psychology says concerning this. Quote open. By this restlessness of mind, every populous and wealthy city is filled with innumerable employments, for which the greater part of mankind is without a need. With artificers whose labor is exerted in producing such petty conveniencies, that many shops are furnished with instruments, of which the use can hardly be found without inquiry, but which he that once knows them quickly learns to number among necessary things. Quote close. Now I hope you would be convinced. Even though Johnson's satire is ruthless, but there is an undertone of wisdom in it. He is not writing this essay to address these people who are so drenched in their desires and wealth that they hardly have time to read. And most probably he would not want them to come close to him because he would soon add the stench of opulence coming from their words and attires. But for those interested in living life to the fullest like us, his real readers, there is a very important lesson to be learned. These people who have so much to spend that they even sniff in notes, they use stuff for which we have to inquire a bit. Why on earth would anyone buy this? What on earth is the use of it? And the moment this question is born in our little minds, we must stay at peace, satisfied that it is an artificial desire. If we had not had the need to buy this fancy looking stuff ever in our life, then why now? In other words, if we have to think a lot before buying something and are not necessitated by any natural need, then we do not need it. On the contrary, we want it. That's the moment when we must convince ourselves of the veracity of this advice. Before buying anything, ask if you need it or want it. After having introduced this aspect of useless desires, he expands a bit upon it. Quote open. Such is the diligence with which in countries completely civilized one part of mankind labors for another, that wants are supplied faster than they can be formed, and the idle and luxurious find life stagnate for want of some desire to keep it in motion. This species of distress furnishes a new set of occupations, and multitudes are busied from day to day in finding the rich and the fortunate something to do. Quote close. While the elite class is busy in manufacturing desires, there is another side to the story. We often forget to look at the other side of the bargain. Yes, on one side of the table sits the don of cryptocurrency, let's say, who demands the manufacturer in front of him. I want a Rolls Royce that has an umbrella in its driving seat door, but it must be big enough to cover my whole body. So ensure that the umbrella is well curved to cover my expensive clothes. I cannot bear a splash of drop on them. And now it is the turn of the manufacturer to go around busying himself with the architects of umbrella, run a few experiments and demand the price accordingly. While the daily laborers on the factory floor get black with the scorching heat of soldering iron. Manufacturing these elite desires is part of the problem. The other part that we often ignore is the function of those who provide the means for these elites to satisfy their elite desires. Imagine for a second that every manufacturer who sits in front of this person says no. Would it even matter to the world? Nada. Nothing would happen. Yes, we have lots of employments because of these big enterprises, but all this sweat is spent upon useless desires, according to Johnson. And what is even more troubling is the fact that there is no medicine to stop this factory of elite desires. It is not that once these elites will disappear from this planet, then suddenly these desires will go away. No, it is in the nature of money that it gives birth to the desire to spend it. Therefore, the new generation of elites will have their fill of desires and the cycle would continue. This also highlights another fact. What we call progress in technology is mostly motivated by the change in the preferences of the elite, because ultimately it is they who have control over mass production. We must keep media in the back of our mind throughout this conversation, because that is ultimately where Johnson wants to take us. So, almost trying to close this matter, Johnson passes this judgment. Quote open. It is very common to reproach those artists as useless, who produce only such superfluities as neither accommodate the body nor improve the mind, and of which no other effect can be imagined than that they are the occasion of spending money and consuming time. Quote close. Well, while closing the matter, he provides us with something new. Up until now, we were concerned with the desire to spend money, but now comes something really closely linked with it, i.e., time. And it is also common sense. What do the rich people have in abundance? Money and time. They have so much money that they want to spend it, but their spending pattern is not haphazard. It must be designed so that it allows them to consume time. Now, Johnson combines them both and explains how they are closely interlinked. Quote open. But the censure will be mitigated when it is seriously considered that money and time are the heaviest burdens of life, and the unhappiest of all mortals are those who have more of either than they know how to use. To set himself free from these encumbrances, one hurries to Newmarket. Another travels over Europe. One pulls down his house and calls architects about him. Another buys a seat in the country and follows his hounds over hedges and through rivers. One makes collections of shells, and another searches the world for tulips and carnations. Quote close. Of course, here he is talking about the rich. But generally speaking, when we earn money, we want to ensure that we spend it such that it spreads into the future and occupies us for the foreseeable future. Time and money are closely related to each other. Our approach to consumption of time changes with acquisition of money. If we have less money, we consider time as an entity that must be used constructively so that we do not squander a moment of it and fall into the despicable state of poverty. Whereas when we have too much money, then we think more about how to spend it. As we have seen, this decision of how we spend our money as much decided by us as those who create appetites, the manufacturers not just of material products but also of psychological behavior. They are not just hidden managers of money but also that of our time. Again, it should be reminded, apply these principles to the media outlets. Everything that Johnson has said is as true as it is simple. There is an underlying principle for all these acts. Whether it be the expression of these appetites by the elites to tell the world that they are rich arising because of boredom, or whether it be the appeasement of these frivolous appetites by the manufacturers of the means of their satisfaction. The fundamental principle that is a part of human psyche is self-interest. Utilitarianism has not yet hatched its wings because though Jeremy Bentham was Johnson's companion, but it would take another 2 decades after the publication of this essay for him to write his groundbreaking book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, in which utilitarianism as a proper theory would be presented with the very same principles that Johnson had already written in The Idler thus. Quote open. He is surely a public benefactor who finds employment for those to whom it is thus difficult to find it for themselves. It is true that this is seldom done merely from generosity or compassion. Almost every man seeks his own advantage in helping others, and therefore it is too common for mercenary officiousness to consider rather what is grateful than what is right. Quote close. Pleasure derived from spending money motivates most of us more than moral principles. Because at the moment when we are making the decision to buy something, we are not weighing it through a moral calculus. We are foreseeing in the future the pleasurable desires that could be achieved by our spending. Those who give us pleasure are highly valued in our society. Those who make us feel less guilty for our wrongs are always sought after, just so that we can feel loved, even if the words reek of the putrefaction of falsehood. Johnson immediately clarifies this behavior in the following words. Quote open. We all know that it is more profitable to be loved than esteemed, and ministers of pleasure will always be found who study to make themselves necessary and to supplant those who are practicing the same arts. Quote close. So to recapitulate, He began with the idleness of the rich that results in their useless consumption of money and time, while all along they are guided by the nose peg of pleasure. And just now, as we laugh at other people for having fallen into this trap, thanks to our habit of reading the worthy journals like The Idler, Johnson strikes us unaware and grabs our neck with these words. Quote open. One of the amusements of idleness is reading without the fatigue of close attention, and the world therefore swarms with writers whose wish is not to be studied but to be read. Quote close. We thought that this bane of idleness, this burden of useless pleasure, this onus of mindless spending is only found amongst the rich. And we counted ourselves amongst the fortunate poor and thought, how would this malady infect us? We are pure from this epidemic. We know how to go about the world because we read books. We profess to know how the world spins. We seem to know how humans behave, and yet we have not looked at our own selves. As Johnson highlighted earlier, not only are those responsible who profess their appetites because of their money are rich, but also those who appease them are also rich. What do these writers cash in on? They cash in on our desire to know. Now comes Johnson's judgment regarding these writers who wear the dress of noble purity while hiding beneath their hides the same psyche that the public benefactor possesses. After having described everything that needed to be known about the philosophical underpinnings of the behavior of the media, Johnson attacks. Quote open. No species of literary men has lately been so much multiplied as the writers of news. Not many years ago, the nation was content with one gazette. But now we have not only the metropolis papers for every morning and every evening, but almost every large town has its weekly historian, who regularly circulates his periodical intelligence and fills the villages of his district with conjectures on the events of war and with debates on the true interest of Europe. Quote close. As much as money and time the essential part of being human, similarly is waging war. What will the newspapers talk about if there are no wars? True interests of state, which ultimately would lead to nothing but war, based upon these principles. But why do these writers of news not let the politicians die as they live? It is because it is in their self-interest and also in the national interest that they tell the public what they have been thinking and most importantly, why. But this is not an act purified of malicious intent. When you will be given the task to write every evening because it has to be published the next morning, and the ultimate purpose is to ensure that the elite person who funds the Gazette is happy and satisfied, you will care less about what the facts say, but more about what the boss would think. After all, as Balzac said, money is the motor of society. We have to just follow the circulation of money in societies, and only that would be enough to tell us which media channel is saying what. And if you think that I am accusing the news writers of this false claim, see for yourself how ruthless Johnson is when discussing them. Quote open. To write news in its perfection requires such a combination of qualities that a man completely fitted for the task is not always to be found. In Sir Henry Wotton's jocular definition, an ambassador is said to be a man of virtue sent abroad to tell lies for the advantage of his country. A news writer is a man without virtue who writes lies at home for his own profit. To these compositions is required neither genius nor knowledge, neither industry nor sprightliness, but contempt of shame and indifference to truth are absolutely necessary. He who by a long familiarity with infamy has obtained these qualities may confidently tell today what he intends to contradict tomorrow. He may affirm fearlessly what he knows that he shall be obliged to recant. and may write letters from Amsterdam or Dresden to himself. Quote close. Coincidentally, today we began with Amsterdam, and here again we have Amsterdam. Unfortunately for Johnson, the true values of journalism has been replaced by the two vicious principles necessary to lure the public to pay and fill their heads with information, i.e., contempt of shame and indifference to truth. A news writer is a man without virtue who writes lies at home for his own profit. It is easy to understand why that is the case. Imagine for yourself that you start an organization. You would only hire those who can increase the monetary value of your products according to your standards. Every head of organization, or CEO as we call him now, wants to profit from his endeavor. But there is a limiting condition that the employees may be of whatever political or ethical inclination in their private life. When they work for him, they do what pleases him. Truth is jeopardized for money and pleasure, but that is just one side of the story. Who gives them money? Who keeps these journalists in job? Who lets this CEO go around in his fancy cars and chateau? By now you must have realized it. It is us. Johnson is as ruthless about this reading public as these journalists. They do what they do because we want them to do it that way, especially in terrible times like ours, the times of war, as he explains. Quote open. In a time of war, the nation is always of one mind, eager to hear something good of themselves and ill of the enemy. At this time, the task of news writers is easy. They have nothing to do but to tell that a battle is expected, and afterwards that a battle has been fought, in which we and our friends, whether conquering or conquered, did all, and our enemies did nothing. Quote close. National spirit overtakes our rational spirit, and we glorify whatever our compatriots do on the battlefield. Journalists know this well. What better way to keep us glued to our mobile screens than the glorification of soldierly acts? Citizens do not have time to go to the battlefield and see what is happening. They outsource this task to the journalists and therefore are at the mercy of these news producers who inform the public that serve their monetary interests well. If there is a journal that speaks the truth and informs the public that the nation could lose because their supplies might run out, nobody is ready to hear that, least of all the governing body. Truth is always ostracized during war times. Whoever has money has the power to manufacture truths, and we, the consumers, sit comfortably on our couches giving them fees to do it. The more ruthless our army becomes, the more passionate we become for our nation. The more cruelty we see committed by our enemy, the more we are convinced that we will win. The more the number of the dead, the more we are assured that the future would be bright after the war. Having forgotten the fact that in war, whoever wins loses, and whoever loses dies. Johnson was well aware of these truths in the 18th century because he had read history. He knew that this had been the norm of wartime journalism. Just as much as the journalists are to be blamed for spreading lies, similarly the public is also part of this crime. Johnson continues. Quote open. Scarcely anything awakens attention like a tale of cruelty. The writer of news never failed in the intermission of action to tell how the enemies murdered children and ravished virgins. And if the scene of action be somewhat distant, scalps half the inhabitants of a province. Quote close. Killing and raping women and children is not a new phenomenon. It is an old strategy to strike terror in the eyes of the enemy and also in the eyes of the world at large. Neither the numbers of the dead, nor the destruction of the buildings, nor the passionate speeches of victory decide the victor of war. When history is written, it twists and turns however much it can. But in the end, it is the victims, or as Primo Levi said, the drowned ones, who are declared victorious. In order to know who the real victim is, all we need to do is to find out who is truly the oppressor and who is truly the oppressed. To determine the truth, Aristotle has given a very simple formula. He says that we speak truly when we say what is the case, and we speak falsely when we say what is not the case. Journalism is nothing without writing and speaking. This advice is all that is required on the door of every journalist's room. But since it would not attract so much money, we find it nowhere. All you have to do is find out what is the case and then say what is the case. I leave you with the conclusion that Johnson gives at the end and hope that we will live in a world where truth will rule without being manufactured. We all share his dread as he concludes. Quote open. Among the calamities of war may be justly remembered the diminution of the love of truth by the falsehoods which interest dictates and credulity encourages. A peace will equally leave the warrior and relator of wars destitute of employment, and I know not whether more is to be dreaded from streets filled with soldiers accustomed to plunder, or from garrets filled with scribblers accustomed to lie. Quote close. Thank you, everyone.